Hello, for those of you that do not know me, Scott McKenzie here, back with home care agency Blueprint. I am the CEO and founder of home care agency Blueprint, and we are a consulting company that helps you start and scale and grow your very own home care agency. So we're doing an interactive series. I'm working with one of our clients, Peter here, and he is launching his very own home care business. We're helping him with that. And we are going to be covering, this is part of a series of going through the different modules in our course as well. We're in module 3, which is part of it is talking about HR and the different staff and basically who is going to be doing what, which role. And Peter has already created a chart and we'll have some questions. So today, he's going to be jumping in and sharing his screen and asking me some questions about what he's created, and I will be answering them, and we'll just have this as interactive for everyone to learn. So thanks again for being here, Peter, and I'll hand it off to you.
All right, I am super excited because I've been thinking about this a lot and I don't have all the answers, and I'm hoping you do. So, yeah, based upon everything that I'm learning from the course and things that you and I've talked about in the past, I put together kind of this list of tasks to run the business, and I've organized these tasks in terms of what's the focus? Is it caregiver, client, marketing, sales, and ops? And then I'm building out like who do I think is going to handle this task, line by line. Of course, other than some bands of hand stuff, which we'll jump into first, I am thinking I'm going to be primary on all this stuff as I start up. But what this reflects is more how am I going to start handing some of these things off as I grow to my first BA, my second BA, maybe a local hire. And so what I'm looking for, Scott, is like, pick it apart and tell me, no, I wouldn't do it this way. And then as you tell me stuff like that, I will make changes real time. And then my goal is hopefully by the time this video is over, I got a really robust plan that I have confidence in and can move forward.
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
So the first section here is like caregiver stuff, and you can see it's focused on bands of hands. And I don't know if you want to say something to the audience here about what Bands of Hands is.
Yeah, Bands of Hands, they are a company based in California, and they are essentially, for those of you that do not know what a PEO is, a professional employer organization, they're similar to that. They're not a PEO, but they basically help with all the HR documentation and all the processes of onboarding new employees, and they work in any of the 50 states of the US. So that was a recommendation that I specifically provided to Peter to do the Bands of Hands route. Another option is there is ADP, of course. ADP directly integrates with WellSky for your payroll. And that's actually, I didn't have Bands of Hands back in 2011. So that's how I started with handling the documentation for the caregivers, was using ADP for just merely payroll processing. And then they also have an HR component. So, what we teach in Home Care Agency Blueprint is we teach to use ADP and their HR for all the payroll and documentation, but it's definitely more hands-on. So there's kind of like a hybrid here, and it depends on, like, when we consult with you, like with Peter's case, I recommended Bands of Hands for the specific situation. After we had a few conversations, it's going to be a better fit. Sometimes ADP is a better fit. What I will say is Bands of Hands is much more less stressful. Like, they handle essentially all of the HR stuff. When choosing either of the options, where this will partly answer your question, Peter, is it's important to go in and really, like, we provide all the caregiver files and employee documents in our course, and whether you use Bands of Hands, they will supplement what needs to be basically filled out by the caregiver. And then there might be some state required, like in California, there's like 3 state forms that are required that Bands of Hands doesn't have that needs to go in the file. So I'm being an entrepreneur and starting multiple businesses from scratch. I think it's really important to really understand every kind of corner of the business. So I think it would be important to, even using bands of hands, to ask to review everything that the caregiver is going to be filling out. Just so you have, like, then you can explain it to the caregiver and say, this is the process that you're going to go through in onboarding. In this case, we'll talk about, I'll kind of pawn off both ADP and bands of hands in this video today because I want to give everybody options. But yeah, when it comes to, well, I'll actually let you ask Peter what your next question is as far as with the caregiver files.
Okay. Yeah. And just one thing I was thinking about bands of hands that's important for people listening, they don't operate in every state yet. So you got to check that too.
Oh, okay. Yep.
All right. So these first 4 tasks, I'm thinking, are clearly PEO, bands of hands tasks. Am I right?
Okay.
And did I miss anything?
All right. So employee documents, that is specifically bands of hands. That is, they will handle the onboarding. If there's anything for Texas specifically that they require, like, I keep coming back to California because I know California so well. They require 3 documents that need to be signed and put in their file specifically, and they require an HCA number for the caregivers, which I know bands of hands, they don't do that. You would need to make sure that you have those, like, 4 components, and then think of bands of hands as they're the core, kind of like HR, legal, labor support. So they're going to be making sure that all of the Texas general labor laws, they'll be filling out, the caregivers will be filling out those documents to onboard. I know that you've spoken to them already, Peter, and I know there's a link that you would send to the caregiver. So that will be basically when that link is sent off the caregiver, they fill out that document, and you have, like, the core of what the legal requirements are for all the labor stuff. Now with the employee, so now when it comes to the payroll processing, it's still going to be required for you to handle the scheduling inside of WellSky. Make sure that the caregivers are showing up on time, and whether it's you or your wife or somebody else that's going to be handling the scheduling. So
Yeah.
that's gonna be at the beginning, starting out. I would highly recommend you would do that because it's not that time consuming, and you want to know that your caregivers are showing up on the case. So
Yeah.
basically in a given week you have, right, caregivers clocking in and out. WellSky automatically will notify you via text and email within, like, we'll calibrate your account, but within like a 5-minute kind of like timeline, it'll text you and say this caregiver forgot to clock in, or they're not there, or whatnot. And then so as you get 10, 12, 15 clients, yeah, like, there's going to be a lot of pings going on of, like, who, it might say someone didn't clock in or clock out, but they might be there and they forgot or didn't know how or whatever. And that, it's just important up front as you're onboarding that first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clients, you're getting those first handful of caregivers and training them really well, that they know, look, it's an absolute no to, like, forget to clock in or forget to clock out. If you're too, in my personal experience, if you're too laid back with it and the expectations aren't set properly up front, then they will just conveniently forget. It's like any job for anybody, right? They'll forget to clock in and out. So this links, the schedule management links back to the payroll. So when you have accurate clock in and out times, that gets finalized by midnight on Sunday of each week, and that's how you know to invoice your clients on Monday. And then those shifts should be totally finalized in WellSky as well for the caregivers. On a side note too, when processing payroll, it's going to be up to your job to make sure that those caregivers have been finalized for those. Say if you do it every 2 weeks, then you want to make sure that those caregivers are notified that, this is going to be your paycheck coming. I do know Bands of Hands does do a integration where you would send the pay hours to Bands of Hands, export that out of WellSky. I believe that the way that they work is that they would then notify the employee and say, this is your paycheck that you're going to be getting. and it gives an option. That's how we did it at Golden Age. We didn't have bands of hands, we had ADP, but we would notify the caregiver a week in advance before their pay was going to be processed and say, if you have any adjustments, just reach out to us. Like if there's any, because they might come back and say, oh, well, I did, I stayed longer that day or whatever it is. And you just want to make
Yeah.
sure it's accurate.
Yeah, that's great. So I forgot about that. So I updated this line item. So it's kind of a two-step process, right? There's the Wells guy kind of recording of everything, but then that gets transferred to bands of hands to actually cut the paychecks, right?
Yes. So think of bands of hands or ADP interchangeably. They're the ones that are actually processing and depositing that payroll into the account of the employee. And then it's still your job or who you assign to do this, but whoever handles the payroll, to make sure that the pay times are accurate ahead of time. And this is a labor human business, right? So it's really important to make sure that the caregivers, it's confirmed. And what I would recommend is every week when you're processing invoicing on a Monday, to like, the better you keep track of the caregivers clocking in and out, then the better that there's not going to be mistakes where they will come back and say later, oh, I thought I was there later. It's harder to track it 3 weeks behind
Yeah.
you than it is to do it by the week. So then that week's been finalized, so then when payroll comes, even if they're notified this is your paycheck that's going to be being dispersed to you, they have the opportunity. Now, the last thing I'll say on the payroll side is it's really important too. So WellSky calculates what the gross payroll is, not minus payroll taxes or even like your agency cost of workers' comp. So, but for the caregiver side, there's payroll taxes and the disability and all that stuff that comes out. So I know bands of hands, they would send what their net pay is. And like I know at GAC at one point when I had our HR person in the office doing our payroll, she would send the gross pay that was calculated out of WellSky. And so the caregivers would get their actual check after payroll taxes and everything was taken out, and they would say, I got stuff taken out that wasn't supposed to be there or whatever. It's a
Yeah.
misunderstanding. So it's
Yeah.
important to know, like, and even just explaining that to them, like I'm huge on onboarding properly when you're bringing these caregivers on. Explain to them you are a W-2 employee. There are payroll taxes. And if they get an itemized, like stub, right? They should be able to see what gets taken out, and then they don't have any questions. So.
Yeah, cool. All right, so I made a couple of changes there to reflect what you gave me. Like I added this payroll pre-processing step. And I don't know if I told you this, but I was talking to another agency recently, and she said she pays her caregivers like, here's your base hourly, and I'll pay you an extra dollar per hour for doing your job. Basically clocking in and out and leaving your care notes at the end of your shift and all that. Like if you do all that stuff right, I'll pay you an extra dollar an hour. And she said it really made a difference. So I don't know.
It is, people are driven on their hourly pay for sure. And if it is an extra dollar an hour, basically it's just it's the way it's worded, right? It's the psychology behind it. So yeah, if they are thinking, okay, I'll get 15 or instead of 14 an hour for doing my job right, then I'm going to make sure I clock in and out. That's good. There's all kinds of incentives that you can implement. One thing that I'll mention is as you get bigger in scale, it's making sure that there's someone that's really explaining that, because if for some reason it's not being explained and then the caregiver just all they hear is they're going to get 15 hour, but they totally discount that what they need to do to get it, then they might come back complaining about, I honestly, it took me years to learn this at Golden Age, but I am not opposed at all to having people fill out, like literally, that's what I'm talking about with bands of hands, that they won't have that. So you'd want to create a template form with your own language on there of that they fill out, look, you are agreeing that you clock in and out, if you do not get any write-ups in a certain period, you are agreeing that this is actually your pay, 14 hour. However, given that you clock in and out properly, you get the 15 hour, sign here type of thing. Then it's documented. If that's not signed and it's just verbal communication, then they'll just I'm telling you, in this business and doing this for 12
Yeah.
years, they will like not. I'm not making it sound like everyone's bad or everyone lies about stuff, but you will get people that will lie and they'll say something, and then you don't want to have any like labor issues or whatever. So
Yeah.
California
Yeah.
is a very litigious state, so we're like extra careful over here. But
Yeah.
thank God you're in Texas because I know it's a little bit better.
Yeah. 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 All right, let's move on to the next one. So this caregiver quality control, I put that in there because it was something that you mentioned. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I don't even know if bands of hands would play a role there. I think it's probably more on the business side, right? I don't know. So that was my question on that line item.
Yeah, quality control as far as like how they're hired and placed with the families.
And doing the right things, right? Like
It's definitely that's going to be on
on
you,
us.
your wife, or whoever. That's not going to be either
Yeah.
ADP or bands of hands won't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
caregiver quality control, like one thing I could speak about on that is really interviewing them properly, asking enough questions. In this business, I know that sometimes things get a little crazy. You get excited, you get a big, say, referral from a facility that's 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're calculating the revenue, you know it's going to be a good case. And maybe you don't have a 12-hour caregiver that can start the next day or a couple days after. So, um, it's easy to be like, well, I'm just going to interview this person quickly and onboard them, get them to sign the documents today and introduce them to the family. And it's tempting to pick the first one or two people that might be available, not pick the highest quality person. And
Mhm.
that's where it's important to really keep your standards high and just, if you have enough job postings online and you've already pre-vetted enough people, you're going to have enough people available that you can reach out to place with the families. But anyway, I'm just saying, like, as long as you have the caregiver go through some hoops. We even at one point later with JC, we implemented a personality assessment. So we would have them, these are things that the caregivers can fill out when there's not a sense of urgency, right? Because you want to just get the general information from them, get them to fill out the onboarding, all the legal labor paperwork, enough to pass the background check and everything. And as long as they know they have some caregiving experience, you feel that you can place them and they're available for the case. But there's a lot more that goes into it when hiring quality people. If you're pre-vetting these people ahead of time, ongoing, and you're able to have them like jump through hoops, like fill out a personality assessment, and there's just certain things that you can implement that if you see that they're going through those processes, then they're going to definitely be likely to show up on the case too. But if it's like too easy for them to get the job, it's easy for them to just back out last minute and stuff. That's in my experience what I've experienced with the business. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's all it's all just kind of like. But then again, the other side of the coin, and this comes from experience in business, is if you're having these caregivers go through all these hoops that they got to jump through, but like you don't have a case for them within a week or two, they're going to be going to another agency. So you also don't want to be spending all this time when HR stuff when like you're not. In other words, if you're interviewing 10, 20, 30 people in a month and you're having them fill out all this HR stuff and you're spending all this time having them fill out paperwork and pre-screen stuff, but you're only placing two or three of those people, you're just wasting time. So there's a balance is what I'm saying. And as you grow and get more clients, it's going to be easier. It was so much easier for GAC as we got past that 15 client mark because we
Yeah.
just had more caregivers that we were talking to, more caregivers that would even refer their friends or family to us. And that's where like it was much easier to hire.
Awesome. All right, this next set of stuff is so I'm an old ops guy. I've been doing ops for most of my career. So you can see I've got primary, and then I have two backups for every task because that's just the way I think. So that's what that means. But going into here, like I don't even know if interviews and in-office caregiver screenings probably the same thing. Maybe I'm being redundant there, but of course, I'm going to be primary on that first. But then I remember you telling me, that kind of in personal interaction with the caregivers, and then you'll see below the personal interaction with the clients. Make sure that's either you or somebody locally. So that's the way I have that structured, as opposed to having that be a VA. What are your
Yes.
thoughts?
Yeah, so the great rule of thumb for caregiver interviewing is, and I go over this a little bit in my course, I'll just explain a little more detail here. So there is a checklist that will provide that different questions you want to ask on the phone when pre-interviewing the caregivers. It depends also, there's logic that's behind it too. It depends on if you have a case right away. I noticed as we started to grow quickly and we had like multiple cases that we needed to fill, say 3-day week 4-hour case, or maybe a weekend case that was 12-hour shifts or something. I would know when I'm getting on the phone with these caregivers, that's my priority, is to see, number one, are they available to go on the shift? Are they available for those shifts? And two, are they local to the families? Those are like the number one and two questions. Are they willing
Yeah,
to either
so
drive,
that's
or
the
they're local?
screening part,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Versus an in-depth interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because if they can't drive there, or they're not living near there, and or yeah, exactly. If they're just not available or close to client, then it's kind of like there's no reason to bring them in the office to interview them,
Right.
at least for that. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. So that's the difference between those two. I like it.
And then
Um,
bringing them in person is important once, when you know that, okay, they could take the case. And then, of course, explaining. I mean, that's a good rule of thumb, is explain to them, like, this case requires transferring, or there is bathing involved. It's hygiene assistance. Are you comfortable with that? Have you worked with a dementia client before? Are you comfortable working with dementia? There's some core, like, 4 or 5 things that are always what the client has, that maybe a caregiver can't transfer, or they don't want to do bathing. They just want to do companion. I've had oftentimes caregivers tell me, I just want a companion case. Like, and
mhm.
then you could tell after you talk to multiple caregivers too, that there's some that just want like an easy case. They literally just want to go kind of babysit, and
Mhm.
those are not always the people, unless you truly have a companion case. But sometimes that could mean that caregiver is a little lazy too, and like you don't always want to, of course, hire people with the culture of that in your company. But
Yeah.
yeah, the biggest things are availability for the shifts, and then if they can drive to the client's house. Of course, they have a car, and then you ask like the more in-depth question, like basically if they're willing to, if they're available to take the case and whatnot, and then you can bring them in person when you know that they've been like pre-screened.
Yeah. Okay. And then let's talk about that. This next one, in person versus, I know I asked you before
Uh-huh.
about, can you do a Zoom interview? I mean, what's your experience there?
What we implemented actually during COVID with Golden Age Companions is we started doing Google Meet, and not even Zoom. We did Google Meet specifically because these caregivers just, they have limited access to either phones or computers half the time, as far as they're not going to download Zoom to get on an interview and whatnot. And Google Meets, they can just click on a link and they're
Mm,
connected right away. That's what we have experienced. But what
that's
we
pretty
do
good.
is Google Meet interview, and then we kind of can see that they'll show up, and if we feel that they're a good fit, then they can come in and fill out paperwork in the office. The other thing to do that makes it much more efficient on doing the in-person interviews are, the best way of the flow to have it is to pre-screen, and or you could do the Google Meet. You can even do a group Google Meet, so you can get 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 caregivers on one. And then you can invite them into the office. So depending on, I did that many times where I would have 6 or 7 caregivers on a video call, and then I would be noting who I liked the best, or who was available to come in, or I felt that was a good fit for next cases. And then I would invite those 2 or 3 or 4 people in the office. And then you already know, okay, like they're going to just basically be coming in to fill out paperwork. The benefit of showing up in the office is they get to see your office, they get to see you. There's a little bit more of a commitment that they've got to drive to the office to get the
Mm-hmm.
job, type of thing. So there's
Mm-hmm.
things like that that are important. And then on like a whole nother side note that people don't think about is, if they build a good rapport with you, then the caregiver is more likely to really represent the company in a positive way than like I just went on this quick video call and I guess I have to e-sign some stuff and show up somewhere at someone's house. So if they're really feeling like they're a part of something, showing up in the office, and maybe you even give them like a t-shirt or like some type of little, like at some point when there's enough revenue coming in where you can, do that, budget for it, but just
Hmm.
giving them like a little thank you for coming by, like that really goes a long way.
Okay, that's good because like you talked there about coming and doing paperwork, and I didn't even have like that was band of hands doing that. So it's kind of like there's what you're saying is you need to have your local person potentially meeting with these people in the office to do paperwork if they don't do it online.
That's exactly. I know Bands of Hands specifically works that there's a link that's sent to the caregiver, or um, either you send it or they send it on your behalf, but they need to fill out all the paperwork ahead of time. But there's still going to be some documents that you're going to have that you're going to want them to fill out. If you have wet signatures on stuff, it just makes it a little bit more like, it's fine to have Bands of Hands handle the majority of like the bulk onboarding, which is going to save you like 25-30 minutes of just having somebody in your office, to where, say if they're sent the onboarding paperwork, you could do it reverse. You can have them come in, meet them in person, and then have them fill out the 3 or 4 documents, like maybe the waivers or consents of stuff that is specific for the culture of your home care business. And then you could say, look, you're going to be getting a link from Bands of Hands to finish your onboarding. That's probably how I would do it, because then if you're just sending all these links off to Bands of Hands and then these caregivers aren't like even taking the cases, it's going to be spinning their wheels too.
But if I wanted, like, say, Bands of Hands to be the official caregiver file management role, then maybe scan those documents and upload them to their portal so that I don't have to worry about it.
So I'm pretty sure there's an option where you can create which documents that you need and then upload them with Bands of Hands, and they can convert them to electronic filling out, and then basically that's like the onboarding packet that they sign.
Yeah,
I guess what I'm trying to say is there's some things that got to be communicated about the culture of the business and however
yeah,
that's done. So it's okay to have them fill out everything electronically, even like those couple documents I was talking about in person. I'm just saying it's a little different when there's like a form, like when you're explaining to them, look, we're going to pay you 14 hour, but you'll get $1 an hour more, given that you clock in and out on time. And by the way, here's the Well Sky Go app that you need to download, and I'm going to send you a link right now to set up on your phone. And so that is a little time consuming, but it's going to go miles when they actually show, like, go to the case and show up.
yeah,
Um, you also want to be aware, though, when onboarding a caregiver to that level, it's almost like an orientation at that point, that
yeah,
you do have a case for them, that you're not going through all this stuff to get their app set up, and then like you're not even going to place them on a case, or you're not
yeah,
sure or whatnot. So
yeah, yeah. So there's like what I'm learning here is there's like different stages of that caregiver onboarding process. So pre-screen, then basic paperwork, and then commitment tools and stuff. We got a place for you to go.
yes, like we've even done it where with the Golden Age at one point, where we would like pre-interview the caregiver, introduce them to the family, and then like once we knew that the family is like, yes, this is a caregiver that I want to start, then we bring them in and basically get all the paperwork done. It's a little
Okay.
tricky doing that though, because it's not technically, it's just it's every agency does things a little differently. It's just, if you're spending all these time and resources like getting them onboarded, and then like the family doesn't like them, and then you don't have another case to put them on, that's where I always say, like, as you get bigger, it's really nice, because then you're gonna have case A, B or C over here that you can place that caregiver on if they don't fit,
Yeah.
with the first one
Yeah.
that you interviewed.
All right, so let's move on. So for these set of tasks right here that we just talked about, I'm going to have those done locally for a lot of obvious reasons. But for the next set of caregiver tasks, I think one of the things I learned from you is anything that can be done without interacting with people remotely, do a VA, right?
Yep.
So these caregiver and I don't know if there's a difference between, I guess you're posting and then recruiting, looking at what's coming in, and then assignments. I would do all that via VA eventually. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so basically the job posting, the rule of thumb there is you always want to have multiple job postings online that are, say, like what we like to teach in our program is like you have a part-time job posted, you have a full-time one, and maybe a 12-hour shift. And then you can even have those 3 job posting templates posted in different zip codes
Mhm.
because like they're going to pick up different people in different areas. And then you'll constantly get applicants, and then you could be pre-screening ahead of time. So somebody that's a VA, the best way to do it is you would create and approve what template posts that are going to be posted on, like we use Hierology is, and that's what we set our clients up with. Hierology is the best platform to use because you could post unlimited amount of postings and they go out to like over 80 or 100 different job boards. And so there's a way to create templates in there, and then you as the owner would create what those templates are, and then you would have the VA basically use those templates and plug and play them and refresh, like you could delete the postings, refresh them, and then
But then they
as
pop to the top kind of thing.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
as there's caregivers applying, that is where it'll be invaluable to have a VA. So we're calling, for those of you watching, that's a virtual assistant. Having that a remote worker, they would go in there and have their own admin login access, and they would be able to pre-screen these caregivers according to the parameters, Peter, that you would set up for them. Like,
Yeah.
these are the different things that we're looking for in a caregiver. We have templates on all of this, so like I'll give you
Yeah.
guidance on that. I'm talking, when I refer to that, I'm talking more like the culture. Like I'm huge on culture with companies, so I always implement a little bit extra of things, asking questions with like on our pre-screening stuff. When it comes to hierology, there's different questions you can ask, and you can make up different questions that are related to your type of business.
Okay.
So
All right. These next two are kind of related, so I put them next to each other. It's like on one side it's the caregiver assignments, on the other side it's client schedule management, and kind of marrying those two things together. All the same person should do that, right?
yeah, so exactly. So those are kind of like 1 and 2 the same. Once when you have a caregiver recruited and then hired, and then once when they're, so like your person that's going to be doing the in-home assessments is usually the case manager. That could be you, that could be your wife, but that's more of like a higher
Yeah.
end job. I mean, the other thing
I
is
have
too.
those here. You can
Okay,
see
yeah,
that, like
we'll
more
jump in
the
there.
client
Okay.
interaction stuff.
So that
Right.
person that does the in-home assessments coordinates with the person that's doing the schedule
Scheduling.
management.
Right. Right.
Yeah, because the person that's the case manager is going to go out to the home, do that in-home assessment, collect all the information about the client, and then they're going to refer to whoever is managing the caregivers. Basically, who do we have that's over in this area that can work these shifts, that maybe can handle dementia, or basically who do we have available that can take that case. And then it's up to, say, that VA should be trained to be on the phone like almost all the time, just constantly talking to caregivers, making notes, because that's just the way you're going to be able to pull up, oh yeah, like I talked to Sandy last week, and she's actually over in that area, and she could probably take that case, type of thing.
Okay. All right. So before we go into some of the client stuff, let's take a look back on the caregiver stuff I had here, like what, 12 items. Did I miss anything? Yeah.
Let me see here. Caregiver. It's actually really robust. It looks good to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And let's
Yeah,
talk about
let's go.
clients. So this next set is client stuff. Maybe just do a quick look there too and say, am I missing anything? But schedules.
Schedule management, client check-in, lead intake, screen, pre-qualify. So, okay, so a couple things I'll speak about here. You covered everything. I'm just going to make some comments on
Yeah.
the lead intake. All right, so think of it in this way. The lead is going to show up in a phone call, maybe they fill out something on the website, they fill out something on Google My Business, maybe they come through, Facebook, social media. So, however the lead shows up, there's got to be somebody that maybe even you're buying leads, but that whoever's in charge of calling that lead immediately is going to be really important. So, whatever role that is, for us at Golden Age Companions, we had a VA that she was in charge of was answering the phone. And I
Yeah.
cannot emphasize enough how many home care businesses just like don't for some reason. I mean we've gotten so many clients because they'll call us and say, wow, you guys picked up your phone, like no one answers their phone. So having somebody answering the phone and then being able to like train them to do an initial intake, so like collecting basic information, what type of care they're looking for, that person also would be routing the call if it's a caregiver. Maybe there's an issue at the client's house or they just have a question about something, they could be routed then to the person that's handling the caregiver scheduling, right? So
Yeah.
um, but the answering the phone, obviously when a new client lead comes through, you want to make sure that they can take that call, and then that person is also going to be in charge of like managing any leads and then also doing follow-ups for people that might need care later on down the road, or maybe they chose another option and they want someone to check in with them later. So lead follow-up and lead intake would go like hand in
Hand
hand.
in hand.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me change some things here. So, because I remember you said, sometimes you want to have a local person do that, but if we can get that to a VA, that's great.
I think
Um,
it's safe to have a VA handling the phone intake because like the way that it could be set up, say with Dialpad with the VoIP, you can essentially just create departments in there, and if it's a new client and they're looking, like you set up parameters. So like if they're needing care right away. There's been, an intake. You can even train that VA to send you a text message yourself or whoever's going to be basically going out and doing that in-home assessment to then follow up and say, okay, call this lead, and or they could warm patch that lead to you. You can set up rules where, like I did that with my VAs. I would say like if it's a client needing care, like and it's urgent, I want you to basically send me a quick text, say that you're on the phone with them, and they would do that. Hey, Scott, I have this, you know, new client looking for A, B, and C care, and are you available to take a quick call? And I would be available, and then I would take it from there.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And then that's where you do the in-home assessment or schedule it. So like I would either schedule it with the case manager and or I would be the one to do the assessment. It just depends on how it was. That was when I was smaller. As I got bigger, then I would have the person that took the lead intake document more information, and then because I really want to be hands-on at the beginning, but then they would take more information down and then they would send that to the case manager or the person that's going to do the actual in-home assessment, which should be done in person.
Okay. And then let's moving on. So what I had down here, client check-ins and reviews. Maybe you could talk about what's the difference.
Mm-hmm. So client check-ins, now there's another process here on when you do place that first caregiver, say it's that case manager, they're in charge of that client. That same
Mm-hmm.
case manager should also be doing the check-in. So and this should be with the caregiver and the client. So like say they start on a Tuesday, they end their shift at 4 p.m. There should be a phone call either as soon as right after the shift. That case manager would call the caregiver and check in and say, how did it go today, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course call the client, how did you like your first day with the caregiver, and then get that feedback. It's okay to call the following day, it doesn't have to be right after the shift. There does need to be a system put in place though on that case manager. Either needs to be extremely organized or there's got to be some system in place that they're reminded to call right after the first shift, because
Okay.
they'll easily forget when they're handling 15, 20, if there's all these people starting on different cases. um,
Mhm.
so that's a check-in. And then that the reviews that comes flowing in later. So after about a few weeks, or even it could be a couple months of care, then that's where there's got to be another reach out, and that's asking, it's usually not the client, it's a family member for a
Yeah.
review.
Is that, you're asking them to, so
Oh,
explain more about it. You're asking them for a review, like testimonial, or you're
yes.
just, okay.
Yeah,
So what about just, is there a process for just checking in like a
yeah.
month, every month? How's
I
it going?
understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, a check-in, like basically a spot, like what we call it as a spot check, and that is the case manager going out. The rule of thumb is every 90 days that they go
Okay.
visit the home and they do a spot check and do like an assessment. Why is that important? It's important because if the patient is declining and the care needs are getting more intense, there's more need for, sometimes it's even a different caregiver, but um, that's to protect your staff too, because if you originally quoted a certain rate for basic care and now the dementia or the needs of the client is progressing, but that caregiver now is doing more work, there's got
Yeah.
to be a, just adjustment in pricing there. And that's usually up to the case manager to have a conversation with the family member. And it's rare that there's all of a sudden you go in after 90 days and you're going to increase their price. It's very rare. This is more like a year down the road that something like that would happen. But if you have documentation of every 90 days of the progress, then that's where it just supports, um, kind of like the evidence that that's what it is. Like if you've got to have that conversation with the family.
Got it. All right. So good. So we added something there I missed. So that's what I was looking for. Perfect.
Yeah, the
All
review, I'll
right.
say on the testimonials, that is mainly for, we like to use Google. I highly recommend to have them post on your Google My Business is where you'd want the reviews.
Okay. All right. Moving on, because I know we're running a little long here, but this is awesome stuff.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, marketing and sales lead generation. So what I was thinking this step is more like we've been talking about that whole going out and getting referrals, not talking to other care centers and different places, not so much paid leads or things like that. That's maybe something else I need to put in here. But I'm thinking I'm going to be doing that at first, and then maybe this person that's on the ground helps with that later. What do you think?
Yeah. So it's always good to have like an all-encompassing strategy when it comes to sales. There's no perfect pill type of thing when it comes to like, okay, this is the exact magic pill on what to go do. Um, you want to kind of cover all your bases. So you want to have, I call it offline and online marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Social media is something that obviously having, an Instagram account, a Facebook account, at the very minimum, those linked together, downloading a software to be able to post, say, automatically 2 to 3 times a week.
Was
Um,
there software you recommended for that?
there actually is a software that I do there's a bunch of them, but there's one called Follower. It's FOLLE. Let me actually it's FOLLOWR. Um yeah, FOLLOWR.ai.
Okay.
And that's really great at posting on all the different platforms. Um and then yeah, like you could post like tips and different things, but you want to show people that you have an online presence. And then I cannot emphasize enough, Google My Business is really important. The other thing in Google My Business that we learned later at GAC was there's a place to post updates on your Google My Business, and it's kind of like a blog that's on your Google My Business page. And
Hmm.
if you could be writing up, I mean, some people go as extreme to do it in every day, but if you wrote up something at least a couple times a week in that blog, what that's going to do is that's going to crawl Google, and it's going to show Google this business knows what they're talking about, and there's a robust amount of information here, and no one seems to like know that or do that. They always talk about posts on Facebook and Instagram, which I agree, you want to have a social media presence. You don't want to have blank profiles. At the same time, Google My Business is something that, it's great to post. You can even post like, different events that you do with the business. And, we went to this event today, or we, a caregiver of the month. And like you can post, you can get creative on how you want to, and you could repurpose that content for social media as well. So that's like the online marketing. The other thing that is specific to caregiving world is there's a handful of platforms to post on to create a directory, and they're paid and free. All of them are free, but you can also pay for like upgraded. One is called agingcare.com. Another one is caring.com. Another one is careinhomes.com. I mean, we have actually in the course that there's a bunch that are listed, but like there's like seniorcare.com. There's all these directory listings that you can create a free profile, and that's just going to help with your SEO.
Okay.
And then the last thing I'm going to mention on the online presence stuff is there's a company called Yext, YEXT.com, and for $500 a year, you can basically you put in your business name, business address, description, and some basic information, and it will actually push your business off to over 200 different directories automatically. And it's still a yearly fee. It's $500 a year, but that really gets your name out there, so you're not having to track everything. But the senior care specific directories are not included in that because it's not made for that. But that's something that's beneficial. When it comes to the offline marketing, joining your local chamber of commerce, and that's how you can start getting affiliated with other healthcare agencies, healthcare businesses, talking to, getting connected with maybe different doctors or owners of facilities. We call them like SNFs, skilled nursing facilities, rehab centers. That's rehabilitation for seniors. Yeah. That's like a great way to start to get connected and start building relationships in the community, is going to your local chamber. I know, Peter, you had mentioned, do I join multiple? And I mean, you could join two. It's good to be loyal to one that you feel that is positioned in an area that you feel that your business will do the best in too, because you want to have it local. Yeah. And then there's a ton. There's a whole thing on how to basically drive referrals. But what I will say on getting referrals for your home care business is you really, like, I'm not saying you, Peter, but like everyone watching, like people need to know to have patience and just be persistent. And the rule of thumb is there's 8 to 12 times that you've got to follow up with a specific case manager or a social worker or discharge planner before they'll send you a referral. That's before they can trust you or know that because there's so many agencies that are walking into these different facilities asking for referrals, and the best way to do it is to really find out what their pain points are, what that facility, how they operate, and address that pain point and be able to say, look, we can take that burden off your hands and take care of your clients in X, Y, and Z way.
Yeah, I was talking to another caregiver the other day, and she said you got to think about it as a reciprocal kind of arrangement too, because sometimes your clients are going to get to the point where they need to go into that facility, right? They might need to go into the SNF, or they might need to go into a hospice or whatever. And sometimes those patients in those facilities are coming out and they need less care, and and so she said that's been one of her core strategies.
It's one of the best. That's exactly. It's how you as an agency can benefit them, not how you can get referrals from them, is important. And then another thing is, like, as you get what I come back to getting more clients, everything just ticks even better. You're going to have a client that will eventually need to go to like a wound care specialist, or they'll need to maybe they get admitted into a facility, or they want to move to like an assisted living, and they'll ask you, is there somewhere you recommend? And we've gotten cross referrals in that way because we've then recommended an assisted living that we really liked, and then we're giving them a referral, right? So then they're going to remember, and that's an ideal. It's not perfect, doesn't happen all the time, but that's ideal is if you're sharing, your client base with other people because you don't
Right.
have a need for, I mean, if they need to go to a good facility, like you want to help the family out too. So,
All right, let's wrap up with some ops stuff here. And then I have one more question for you. So, accounts receivable, collections, insurance processing, basic financial stuff, right? So
yeah.
that's all back office VA stuff, eventually. And then I just have business leadership, managing all these systems. I'm not going to hand that off to anybody probably. And then just managing the staff. We got to own that. Um, Anything missing there?
It looks good. The only comment I have is the accounts receivable and the invoicing should be the same person. We had a remote worker that was a specialist in doing billing, and basically they invoice our clients every Monday. Keep in mind, the person that's a case manager going out and doing the assessments, it's really important. I cannot stress this enough. It's so important to get the clients to fill out an electronic waiver form that and or get a credit card on file that, if they don't pay after a certain amount of days, you'll need to charge them.
Mm.
Um, you want to make sure that, like I know with WellSky, once when the electronic payment processing is set up, there's going to be a link on the invoice that shows that they can click that link and pay online. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just however you kind of integrate it in your business, but you basically want people paying electronically, however it is, not telling the case manager, oh, I don't want to do that. I just want to send in a check. Because then you're going to find out you're now fronting money for payroll because you've got to pay your employees on time.
Right.
So
Right.
if it's going weeks and weeks that money's not being collected on time, then that could be obviously an issue. So that case manager should make sure that they get the family to understand that they've got to pay electronically online, and sometimes you got to earn their trust. They don't want to give their banking information on the first assessment, but you can say that's okay, there's a link right on the invoice, you can pay there, and that's where that VA that's doing the invoicing each week, they would then also review the AR and make sure that there's not any past due invoices. And then you want to have like a rule of thumb, like not past like 3 weeks
Yeah.
at the most. Like it should be like if there's like a 2 week old invoice that hasn't been paid, I mean they should be on the phone, like basically, like even if they need to collect the payment, like I'll send you the link right now while I'm on the phone. Like, you don't want to be like shark about it or like that aggressive, but at the end of the day, it's like this is a business that you're running. You just got to make sure that you collect, like you're providing the service, you're providing the caregivers. And um I got sloppy with this like middle of GAC where I was handling the invoicing, but when I got so busy with everything else, I mean, we had a client at one point that went 6 weeks past due and they owed us like $28,000, and then they
Wow.
passed away.
Oh
And
no.
then the ex-girlfriend took over the estate or whatever, and like it was this whole thing. So people don't like it, this just comes from experience. No one told me that at the time, like how like you just don't, and you don't think it's an issue at the time, right? Because you're like, oh, they're gonna pay, and this person was on hospice, but we didn't know they'd pass away so soon, and we had no idea there's all these other members of the family that were like power of attorney are involved in certain ways. So
Yeah.
I cannot stress enough, it's so important to really be collecting that. I mean, we get an AC, like a electronic check form filled out, and then we would actually process that on their behalf each week, each Monday, and then the funds hit the account on Wednesday.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So,
Yeah, I was talking to this other agency owner, and she told me a story about this where she knew her client was wealthy,
mm-hmm.
and it was this guy's wife, and he wasn't paying, and it was like Christmas time, and she's like, look, you really gotta pay me because I need to
Mm-hmm.
pay my caregivers. And
Yeah.
he's like, and his thing was like, well, I guess I gotta sell some gold then. And she's
Yeah.
like, well, then yeah, you got to.
I know. It's like exactly. Yeah, that's no, that's good. It's important to collect the AR because it just you're providing a service. And
Yeah.
I know some agencies collect deposits and stuff. Sometimes we'll say that we do require a 2 week deposit, but if you felt the ACH form now, we'll waive that. We've done that before too.
Okay. So last thing, and then we can wrap this up because I know we've been going for a while, but we've really packed a lot in here. is if you look at kind of like how I have these P's and things. I mean, let's get past bands of hands and my wife and I. Let's just look at this extra staff that I'm bringing on, and let's maybe filter out the blanks here for a minute and go, okay, for my local hire, these are the things I want my local person to do. Just scan that list and go, yeah, that smells right.
This would be like boots on the ground, like local. You're talking about like
Yeah.
almost like in office.
Yeah.
I would say so caregiver interviews, and that can
Yep.
kind of go hand in hand with quality control. That'll
Yep.
just kind of go hand in hand already.
Yep.
And then
The client stuff.
in-home assessments,
Yeah.
client check-ins, spot checks, and then the offline marketing.
Yeah. So that sounds right. Okay, so let's then look at, and then I was trying to figure out how to break up the two VAs, right? And so I don't know why I didn't have a B there. So if you look at the primary backup that I have, so I was thinking, okay, my first VA, I want to handle all this stuff, and then maybe that's enough for that one VA, and then I need to bring on a second one to do this kind of stuff. How does that smell?
Yeah, so let's see, job posting, recruiting, caregiver, client assignments. Yeah, I would say that that would work. The thing to be aware of as you get bigger is the person that is doing the lead intake, if they're also doing like the way Golden Age had it divided, we actually had two separate people. One person was only doing the lead intake and following up and answering the phone, and then
Yeah,
the other person was handling the recruitment, job posting, um,
yeah,
etc. But you can't have one person do all of those up
in
front.
the
It's
beginning.
just
Yeah,
important to make sure that as you're getting busier, you don't want to have your VA so busy where they're not, it's going to voicemail, they're not answering the phone when you get that brand new client calling in. That's
right.
why like eventually I dedicated that line for like that's all you're doing. You're answering the phone. The other thing is with GAC is we had hundreds of leads that needed to be followed up on. So she was
Yeah,
busy just doing that alone. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, to start out, that's good. And then social media posting, invoicing, accounts receivable, collections. I think that's yeah, that's great. That's actually really
Good
um
separation.
that's awesome because the social media posting is something that can be done at any time, in the wee hours, right? It doesn't have to be done in invoicing is usually set on Mondays. Accounts receivable can be done early in the week, which goes hand in hand with collections. And then insurance processing, that's going to go in hand with the invoicing. So when invoicing a long-term care insurance company, there's usually like a W-9 form that's got to be filled out by your agency to send to that LTC. Um,
Yeah.
and then once when you're like basically a provider with them, which is pretty instant, it happens within days, then um, you just collect all the information from the client to make sure that you have their benefit arrangements and stuff, and then you would just submit, meaning this VA could submit the invoice, a copy of the invoice with the care logs, which is what is logged when the caregiver clocks in and out on the shifts. It
Mhm.
automatically will create care logs, but those have to be downloaded in a separate report out of WellSky, and those two things have got to be attached, of what the caregiver did on the shifts, along with the invoice and the times they clocked in and out. That gets sent to long-term care, either electronic fax or some LTCs do email now, and then they will reimburse. And then this VA should also be the one to follow up and say, okay, where are we at on sending out that check? Sometimes
So,
the insurance companies take, 4 or 5 weeks to
so
send.
I should probably take this first task then and have it be primary on this second VA. This payroll pre-processing, it's like getting all that stuff figured out because it's tied into invoicing and all that is what I'm hearing.
It can be. The only thing is the person that's handling the schedule of the caregiver, like say this VA that's handling who's going, um, like
Yeah.
who's showing up on the shifts, that whatever times are going to be logged is going to integrate with the payroll.
Okay.
Um, because basically whoever's managing of all these caregivers showing up on shifts, that person's going to have the answer to like the payroll, right? They're going to have an answer to where it did that person show up? Did they really clock out 20 minutes late this day?
Yeah.
Should they really get paid mileage because they logged 85 miles, So stuff like that.
Yeah. So kind of group the assignment thing with the payroll thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then all this recruiting stuff, kind of group that together. The job opening, the recruiting, client schedule management probably goes there. Oh, P1. This has been awesome, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for being here today and just yeah, I'm more than happy to answer all these questions, and thank you for also, partaking and allowing this information. This is great. This is now going to be on, my channel. This video is also going to be inside of our course. So for those of you that join us and get access to the course, you're going to have access to this video as well.
Yeah, and I can even send you this template if people want to use that as a starting point.
Yep, exactly. So there's a
All
lot of
right.
good information here.
Yeah, this was incredible. Long
yeah.
session, but man, action packed.
Yep, exactly.
Thanks again.
You say ask the right questions, you get the right answers.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. Thanks for being here today. And thank you for those of you that are watching. If you are interested in, joining us at Home Care Agency Blueprint, you want to start up your own home care business, just go ahead and there's a link in my description below in the video. You can book a call with me and my team, and we can talk about how to start up your own home care business. So thanks again, Peter, for being here, and we'll see you on the next module.